We really want to literally be the Henry Ford of space. We want to be remembered as the people who transform space from hardware to digital age, where space enterprises begin and finish at the keyboard.
Today, we are very excited to have Jim, who is the co-founder and CEO of Phantom Space with us. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Stanley. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining. I'm very excited. I've been looking forward to this section for long. So again, thank you for joining us. And then again, thank you for this great book that you've given me, mailed me all the way from across the continent. And I've been enjoying it very, very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to write.
Exactly. And thank you for the, autograph and all the good sayings as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a bit about what Phantom Space does first? And then, how come you want to get on this journey, and what was your vision and mission?
Yeah, so Phantom Space, we think of ourselves as the Henry Ford of space. And by that, we want to bring the kinds of capabilities that you can obtain in space to the everyday person. And just like Henry Ford 100 years ago brought terrestrial transportation to the world and changed the way we lived, we want to bring space into the digital age where space enterprises begin and finish at the keyboard. And right now it's a very hardware intensive kind of industry, and we're undergoing a lot of transformation, but we think the next transformation, or Space 3.0, is this digital transformation of space to where your grandchildren and mine can start the space enterprises without ever having to build the space hardware to go up there.
That's good. And what sort of excites you at the very beginning and trigger you to start the company with this mission?
Well, I chuckle because I've been at this a long time. Arguably the first space startup I was involved with was SpaceX. And, if you go back to 2001 when we started it, and you said at the time, gee, we're going to build a rocket and go to space, on private money. That was literally an act of insanity to say that. People just didn't do that. It was a nation state dominated kind of activity. And for somebody to actually say they were going to do it was not rational. So ever since then, we've watched SpaceX really change the way space is done and become a massive change agent in that business. And I've been involved in a total of 11 startups, including Phantom. And what we saw all along in these 20 some odd years since SpaceX started was that there really was a space being left behind by SpaceX and others who were focused on things like Mars for the space economy itself. And that if we were to emulate the kind of success that the internet and online merchandising and apps on your phones have created in terms of an ecosystem, we need to do the same thing in space. And that will draw in so much in the way of talent, sort of crowdsourcing, if you will, the talent of the world into the space domain without having to become space experts per se and learn all the nitty-gritty details about building rockets. So we set out to build with Phantom the infrastructure to launch things into space because that's the gateway. We still think that that's always going to be a fairly scarce resource, so we want to control it, at least what we need of it. And then we want to build the satellites that go into space. And then we want to create a network, which we call Phantom Cloud, that essentially makes that digital space possible so that you can get on your keyboards and access our cloud and have that deployed into space.
Excellent. That's very exciting. For the first part, how are you differentiate the launch product versus what SpaceX has been doing?
Yeah, so we don't compete with SpaceX. That's one of the things people often erroneously think. They're focused on very large payloads, going to Mars, deploying Starlink. Last year, for example, 75% of all SpaceX's launches were for Starlink. So we take the Henry Ford approach with respect to launch, which is to serve 95% of the market, which is the lower cost, smaller satellites. Literally 95% of all satellites launched last year were under 500 kilograms in size, which makes them, the size of a refrigerator or smaller. And so we're building a launch vehicle we call the Daytona, which is named after the racetrack. And that is designed to very efficiently serve that market at a price point that's as cost effective as what you could do on SpaceX. SpaceX does launch these satellites, but they have to crowd 100 of them on a bigger launch vehicle. And so in that way, they resemble the Greyhound bus service in the United States rather than Uber. So we're really the Uber of rocket companies.
Oh, okay, okay, that's a very good one to let the audience to have an idea. And with your experience in SpaceX, now you're doing your Daytona, versus their Falcon. Can you tell us a bit? I think we talked about it before. Why do you think Daytona is so necessary when Falcon would be doing something that you believe would not be, totally overlapping?
So first of all, you have to understand Falcon has a finite life. SpaceX has already said this. They're going to go completely to Starship, which is so large that only 3 starships would launch everything in the world that launched last year. That's how large this is. So it's clearly aimed at launching 40,000 more Starlink satellites. That's what they filed for. And that'll be 150 to 400 launches, depending on how big they are. So SpaceX has a tradition of stopping the sort of things that are a distraction to the main focus of the company, which really is Mars and Starlink. And so the Falcon 9 is going away. So this ride sharing partnership will definitely change, and they're going to go out of that business, I believe. And so the Daytona is really picking up, that part of the market, and not only being able to service those customers that were once flying on SpaceX Falcon 9s, but we'll also do it more efficiently by taking customer satellites to the place where they want to go when they want to go. And there's an immense cost savings that comes just from that. Let's say if all the launches were free, you still have to pay a lot of other secondary costs, such as time, such as engineering. If you're going to fly with 100 other satellites, there's a lot of engineering that has to go into that, because each one of those rockets now becomes very unique as a result. So there's time, which is expensive, as we know as business people, and then there's all the other hidden costs, if you were. And if you don't go to the right orbit, then there's essentially a tax on your business of making do with the orbit that you can get, rather than going to the one you want. And there are physics behind a lot of these companies why they need to have their satellites in a very specific orbit that SpaceX doesn't serve.
Okay, I got it. And how, in your SpaceX experience, can accelerate the manufacturing and a successful launch of Daytona? And are you seeing that as basically a fundamental success already? And if so, what would be the key factor to sort of lower the cost and increase efficiency for the first few launches, Jim?
So the first thing you have to do is stop the engineers from engineering once you have a product that's viable, because engineers always want to improve things. But apart from that, really, we stick with a very simple launch vehicle. Rockets have been flying for over 100 years. The technology is the same, more or less, what it was 100 years ago. We're in this business of incremental improvement, so there's no technology that really changes the game at this point. What changes the game is your operations model of being able to build a lot of these very simply at a profit and flying a lot of them. So those are the two things we focus on. First, with building it, we don't use exotic materials. We don't use exotic engineering solutions. It's stuff that we know works, that's worked before. A lot of it, were lessons that we learned from the Falcon rockets. Chris Thompson, our CTO, we call him Father Falcon. He sort of grimaces when we say that, but he was the lead guy on both of those launch vehicles. And we borrow a lot of those basic concepts from those vehicles, which are very cost effective. And then secondly, on the operations side, you have to think about how do you launch a lot of these rockets. The market demand out there is for at least 300 to 400 of these a year. And if we can service just a small percentage of that, say 100, we make a lot of money, and it's a very good economic solution. So we have to have the launch throughput ability. So if you think of it as the equivalent of airports, if you are an airline, you have to have takeoff and landing rights. You can't just show up whenever you want. There's a schedule. Same is true with launch sites. So we focus from day one on the ability to have a lot of throughput at the launch sites. And we're one of the few in the world that has the regulatory authority at the various U.S. launch sites to fly over 100 launches a year. So between these two things, it really makes a difference on the cost.
Right. And then when are we shooting up the first one? And then how is the whole supply chain composed right now? So where do you make most of the components, and which component do you really keep in-house as the competitive edge?
Good question. So the first rocket should go up in late 2026. We've done a lot of testing so far. We're very far down the path. You won't see much of this in public, but we've done stage level tests. We're about to do more stage level tests. And we'll show up at the launch pad end of 26, probably Vandenberg, with a rocket ready to fly. And we think we work most of the risks out, partly because of our supply chain strategy. So, you ask, what do we build? I'll start with the things we don't build. First of all, is the engines. We buy those, and we have suppliers, multiple suppliers that can build engines, and they're good at it, and we let them be experts, right? We're experts at the vehicle system, they're experts at the engine. So we let them go ahead and put that all together, and we buy them at a very cost-effective price. So the rest of the vehicle, pretty much we do ourselves. So all the tanks and structures are ours. The flight computers, the software, that's all ours. We did license the software from NASA from a program that never flew, and we approved it, and we've tested it and proved it out. We build the valves, for example. So we have this philosophy of buy what you can that is affordable and has a good supply chain of capability there, and make those things that don't meet those requirements. So that's really where we've come out. And the net result is we know the costs of our rocket, and we know what the market price will bear. And on our very first rockets, we're in 30 to 40% gross margin. So we're able to build these at a very, very effective price because we've either built all the parts we're going to build and know what that costs, or we bought them already and have contracts in place.
Right. You almost make it sound like making a rocket is so easy. Just back to 101 is operating leverage. They really care. The supply chain, we can sort of master it already. Am I saying a good statement on already? Not really.
So it's a little bit like race cars. So you mentioned I race cars, and I also build race cars. You can see one behind me here. And, they're a car like any car on the road, except they're very special. So rockets are kind of that way. They're very unforgiving, like race cars, of things going wrong because they're very energetic, while race cars are going very fast. So failures tend to have massive consequences. That's really kind of the big difference. So what that comes down to in the end of the day is an experienced team. So somebody who's never built a race car, you wouldn't want to build a race car you drove in. You'd rather have an experienced team do it. And so not only is our team at Phantom, by the way, experienced race car builders, we're experienced rocket builders, and we're also experienced satellite builders. So me, myself, I've been on 65 satellite programs. Chris Thompson, our CTO, he's been on something like 7 different launch vehicle programs. And you tend to know the things you can get away with and the things you can't get away with. So that also helps us on our capital efficiency. So we've done all this together to date for less than $40 million. And we've got about $50 to $70 million more that we need to get to cash flow positive. And it's because we have this good team. We don't waste money in developing things we don't need, and we don't make mistakes, which can be costly. So not to say we won't make mistakes, but we've been very good at that. And I'm very proud of our team, who's probably one of the most experienced teams in the business.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And if I could jump in a little bit for the audience who might not have the chance to read this book, I highly suggest that I'll send over the names later, because Jim is nice enough to send me one. And then just so everyone knows, basically, I think if I remember correctly, Jim, when you before 6 years old, I think you've been playing around the car, the driving cars already. And then even when you were sort of youngsters, you're racing with people, just literally in the middle of the Utah, isn't it? That sort of sets the background of your young period into now.
Yeah, we love to build anything that was fast. We love even more to go in it when it's fast. So rockets are kind of a natural extension of that. And I'll tell you, everybody at Phantom are what we call builders, makers, and doers. So they're really of the same ilk, and people that like to build things. So it's in my soul. That's what I like to do. That's why this is one of my offices you see in the background here, which is my machine shop.
I know. I think it's every man and the boys love to have a look around at your office. And I mean, if we take a step a little bit, going back to history, I mean, you've been in this sector for so long, and then with the book that I read, you've also went to a lot in the old, the Soviet Union time, back then, doing rocket, and then you've been working with NASA, when you were basically in university periods. Can you describe what it was like? And then fast forward all of a sudden, when Elon called you, you sort of work with him, and after you work with him until now, how you see this whole, time machine went through from before, now, in the future. Can you give us some, sort of a sharing on a personal journey? Yeah.
Yeah. So, my personal journey, I think is unusual, that I held my first job in Toulouse, France, for the French Space Agency. I'm, by the way, an American citizen. So they had a reason to hire me because I had a patent on something that they desperately needed for this mission to Mars. So, I had a young family in tow, went over there, didn't know a word of French. I learned French on surplus, as the French say, and on the job. And I also learned Russian. And it was a joint Soviet mission to Mars. that we were doing. So that's why I learned Russian and French. And it was a very interesting period of time. And I have to tell you, all these things that have happened to me, which is probably a lesson, is a sense of, just things that happened. Nothing seemed historic at the time. And, the Soviet Union was this existential threat to us as Americans, that we all imagined that we would die at the hands of a Soviet nuclear weapon someday. And, fear was probably overblown, but that's how we saw it. So to interact with these people who were once our enemies, as Glasnost in the early 90s was coming about, to see this openness and to go there was really quite something. And I can tell you, the early Soviet Union in my career was a very rundown place. The communism was not good for it in their case, and the infrastructure wasn't there, and the Soviet spirit, or the Russian spirit, I should probably better say, overcame a lot of these deficiencies in central planning and all these other aspects that really weren't very efficient. But they were some of the smartest people I ever worked with, and they would, we'd take a calculator or a computer to solve a problem, and they would, get paper and pen out and do dimensionless numbers. So it was very interesting to work with them. I was there during the time when the Soviet Union fell, the putsch in 1991. And we went to Moscow because we heard there was all sorts of shooting going on. So we went into the city and saw that. And so the aftermath of that was really kind of what laid the foundation for what's going on today in the world, which was this superpower that collapsed, and there was an enormous amount of scientific wealth, an enormous amount of technology that was available to be swept up by rogue nations, the U.S., the West, and the Soviets were poor. The Russians ran out of money. That's why they had a revolution there, and communism collapsed, as they ran out of money. So once I went back to the United States, I was treated like some sort of traitor for having worked with the Soviets. Even though I was a Reagan voter back in those days, I was nonetheless considered a traitor until somebody in one of the intelligence agencies found me and sent me back to Russia for about 6 years to help stop this brain drain, this buying of this technology, of the people, to go to North Korea and some of these other places like Iran. I had breakfast in the Ministry of Defense hotel with Iranian Revolutionary Guard sitting next to me, which is sort of an amazing story. And so we did a lot of things with them. We did a lot of joint missile defense work with the Russians. Unthinkable in today's world. I launched satellites out of Russian submarines on their submarine-launched ballistic missiles. We converted ballistic missiles to satellite launchers to get them off the market. And that's really helped the Russians become world players at the time in commercial launch. They were the ones who started this small satellite rideshare. And a lot of what we do in SpaceX does really goes back to those days. And it ended up with the Russians arresting me for espionage. That's what they accused me of, held me under house arrest for a couple of months. Al Gore came to my rescue, thankfully, and I got pulled out of that mess. But that was the beginning sort of what we see in the modern Russian state with Putin and this oligarchy over there that I don't really know what politically to call it. It's not communism, it's not democracy, but this oligarchy, and it's a country run by permission. So, you fast forward that to Elon calling me in 2001, and the first words out of his mouth was he was an internet millionaire and he wants to do a private mission to Mars, and he needs Russian rockets because he can't afford American rockets. And he was told that I could help him go buy some. And sure enough, I was the guy. It's a needle in a haystack story. So yeah, once we started going over to Russia, we first had to decide, what this mission to Mars was going to be like with Elon. So I put a team together of people, to size it up, because you can't just go say, well, on a rocket, you got to know what you're going to launch. And so I went and grabbed some of my friends who, were what I call corporate refugees, and they really, like me, didn't fit well into the corporate America, and had this idea that somehow we should be doing this and not having the government do it. And so they were, these guys, Chris Thompson, my CTO at Phantom, is one of them, would build their rockets on the weekends in their garages and go fly them in the desert. And these were, big 10-meter long rockets, and do it with beer money. So got them involved, and we went over to Russia a couple of trips once we knew what we were looking for, and tried to make a deal on a couple of rockets. And the Russians were very dismissive of the entire episode over there with Elon. And Elon was, to the Russians' defense, I guess, He was late 20s, and he didn't dress very well. And I mean, he dressed a whole lot nicer last week for the inauguration, or this week, I guess it was, than he did back in those days. Let me tell you. But you know, he was seen as a kid, and the Russian society is very senior oriented, if you will, and you know, so a younger kid, even though they had a lot of money, wasn't seen as somebody that had any authority, because it's a very patriarchal society. So we went hand in hand back to the United States, and it was on one of those trips back that Elon, it was our last trip back, Elon announced that, you know, we could build a rocket ourselves, and that was the famous conversation we had on the airplane home from Moscow to New York. And what I discovered in sort of uncovering what motivated Elon to do this was that he'd been, you know, hanging around with the same guys that we put together to design this Mars lander for him, and went out to these rocket tests out in the desert. And Elon had somewhat of a religious experience in the process, and decided that if these guys can do it with beer money, you know, he could add his talent of being a great entrepreneur and being able to raise money. He had money, and we could do this ourselves. So that's how SpaceX started. And you know, we used to call it our little company, and we found this place on Grand Avenue in El Segundo that was an old import-export shop, and you know, it was disheveled and not the place where you thought a revolution would ever start, but it did. It started there, and it started with about 5 of us, and that's it. So you know, it really came through this very circuitous path of serendipity through France and Russia and trials and tribulations and SpaceX. And I, you know, honestly, I didn't think Elon would be successful. I really never imagined it, because I knew what he wanted to do with these very large rockets would take close to $1 billion. So that's why we started with the Falcon 1, which was small. And we, you know, he proclaimed to all of us he'd spend $100 million on this, and that was it. That was a lot of money, right? But you know, I made my calculation that you know, the money wasn't out there in the markets of $1 billion, and I was right, actually. And eventually, the Falcon 9 got financed by NASA when they retired the shuttle. So it was non-dilutive financing, really, that came through NASA, and that's what makes SpaceX what it is today. Now, that doesn't take away from at all the SpaceX story, but it just shows you that it's this convergence of events and being at the right place at the right time. And I left SpaceX fairly early, and a lot of you know, Chris stayed for another 10 years, and really achieved a lot. These guys really achieved a lot. But it was that spark, you know, back in 2001 that became a revolution that we see today. And you know, if Elon and SpaceX settle Mars, boy, what a thing!
I know. And I believe you are saying it very humbly. And from my perspective, I mean, you and Elon have some common character in a way. At least he also liked car racing. His early career, I remember he was driving this race car with Peter Thiel to one of the pitches. He went in the early days.
He's a better entrepreneur than me, but I'm a better race car driver.
Oh yeah, I won't doubt it. But you got a very good point. Everyone's journey is very unique. Like you mentioned in the book, I mean, when you were in uni, I think you wasn't the one who picked to attend a program in the space, but then somehow your other friend did not choose to go because of the girlfriend staying. Then you sort of meant to be going, and that was one. And then when you went to Soviet Union, I remember there was a night you mentioned about the restaurant. You were like, "Hey, what's going on?" in the dark, and that guy sort of hit the metal door after 10 minutes waiting, and then it's like a big feast in a big you know, concert hall kind of a treating. So life is really unpredictable. It's like how we met over, you know, the company and all that,
Right.
and then you know, so it's just really exciting. But going back in your SpaceX journey, what are some of the key 3, I think, lessons or achievement that you believe you've learned and picked up, and now you can sort of fast forward in Phantom that accelerate the success on the engineering bit, so you can focus on the operation, Jim?
Probably 3 things, right? I like things that come in threes. The first thing I would say, this is advice to anybody, is you can never dream too big. You just can't. And, you know, as you know from my book, I'm a big dreamer. But Elon outclassed me by a long ways. And, you know, I thought to myself at times, man, this guy, he really is way out over his skis, as we say in English. And you just really can't dream too big. You know, if you do, you've self-limited what you're going to do. And take an element from Elon. You know, he said, we're going to go settle Mars. And that was a super act of insanity. I used to tell him back in the early days, you know, when we were talking about building the rockets, I remember one time he showed me these plans for a Mars base, and he says, what do you think of this? And I said, Elon, Mars base, really? I said, who did this? He goes, oh, I paid somebody to do some architectural drawings. 2001. And I said, Elon, put this away. I said, this is like talking about aliens. It was almost embarrassing. But that's how big he dreams, right? So that's number one. Number two is you can never work hard enough, right? Once you have your dreams, you can never work hard enough. And if you want to achieve your dreams, you have to work hard at it. There's just no other substitute. And, it doesn't mean you by yourself, but you have to create a team around you of people to help you do it. You have to get people to buy into your dream with you, that believe you and that want to help you. And that's the only way you can get this done, because it's not one person, and SpaceX is not one person. It's tens of thousands of people, and each and every one of them have contributed to it. And then the third thing I would say is, that capital money is precious. So human capital is precious. That's number two. Number three is financial capital is absolutely precious. So you can never be too cheap. And I get upset with my colleagues, and I won't name names, but you know who you are, who raised a huge amount of money and blew it. And it makes it hard on the rest of us. And it's just wrong. It's wrong to, waste people's money that they've earned without giving it extreme care. And, the more practical side of it is, any dollar you save today is a dollar that may save you down the road, rather than just being, there for the art of frugality. We've survived 2 years here in the space industry where financing was near impossible to come by, and we did it because we're very, very cheap. And every one of the people in Phantom that work for me buy into that 100%. They treat it as their own money, and so that precious investor capital really has to be treated very, very gingerly. And it actually, innovation comes out of that. They say in English, necessity is the mother of invention. And, I say frugality is the mother of invention, because it makes you figure out what you really need and go back to the drawing board, as they say, and decide, do I really need this? And in the end, it's a much more satisfying experience.
There's a very good sayings. Dream big, work hard, utilize good resources. So in your case, Jim, what is your big dream now with Phantom Space?
We really want to literally be the Henry Ford of space. We want to be remembered as the people who transform space from hardware to digital. And I think that's a fundamental transition that makes it accessible to everyone around the world. Americans, anybody, of all walks of life, of all economic levels. And through that, we will change the world, because these people will create value out of this capability that brings more value back to the rest of us. It makes life better on Earth. And that's really what we're about. So if I can achieve that, I can rest happily.
It's a very good positive energy, and the bigger picture, definitely for the humanities. I can feel it. So you mentioned about your first business briefly, the launch. How about the second business? What are you going to do with the constellation, satellite bit? Can you comment a bit and share a bit more on that part?
Yeah, so we have a vertically integrated product plan, and the rockets are really the foundation, much like they're a foundation of a building, that it allows us access to the heavens. And without that, you've got to go to somebody else. And if you just look for 5 minutes at SpaceX, you realize that that's the foundation of their business, their ability to put things in space. And from there, you build the application. So the applications are built on satellites, which we build in-house, and we have that expertise. It's really not that different than rockets. A lot of people think it is, but it's really not. Rockets are harder, I would contend. Satellites are relatively easy. There's a lot more of a supply chain out there for that. And then the third product side is Phantom Cloud, which is the data servers in space. So that's the digital side of the company, and that's the ultimate goal. And it has been from day one of the company.
Right. Okay. So the second bit is basically helping the third party launching the satellite constellation. And then the third bit is more like a data center, digital platform up on the cloud, isn't it? And what kind of timeline are we talking about for product 2 and product 3?
So we already built it and delivered a satellite in our first 2 years in business. So those are going. We've got 2 more satellite contracts we're going to announce this week. We've signed the paper on one of them, and we've got a press release coming out, and then the second one's just about to be signed. So we have a number of other customers that we're talking to on the satellites. That's coming along. We have about $90 million in launch contracts from commercial customers. We have a $300 million NASA launch contract. So those two are really kind of the financial foundation of the company. On Phantom Cloud, we see deploying our first satellites on our first launch, and then we see the cloud and data centers operational starting in about 2028. And these will be the same. These capabilities will have the same customers. So the satellites we launch for customers will be able to communicate with our cloud, and then we route that data back to the Earth, so they don't have to go through ground stations. And we'll build that capability in stages, and we'll start off with the backhaul and cloud compute, and then the full data centers starting in about 28.
Oh, excellent. How big is the team now that make all this dream, coming true?
So the core employees are about 20, and we have a number of contractors. We like to use them. So if you include them, it's about a 30-person team. We're in the middle of doing our Series B right now, and we'll probably raise another 20 people into the team. But we don't need to be more than about 50 people by the time we get to our first launch. You just don't need that many people, and we try to get the best. And so that's been one of our secrets.
That's exciting. Today I just saw, I think, 3 people team somewhere in America produce billions of valuation company. So I suppose in the future, the AI world, the space world, with the increasing infrastructure spending and efficiency, we don't really need a big team for a lot of stuff. In particular, the supply chain has been so mature. You mentioned Elon, this week on the presidency stage. Apparently, Trump is doing a big project on Stargate, with all these people up there talking about $500 billion of spending on the infrastructure. Are you seeing that having any long-term support or positive impact to what you're doing on the space, direct or indirectly? How are you seeing that?
Yeah, so the next 4 years will be heavy into space, and a rising tide lifts all boats, as we say. So we think that there's both military spending in space, because that's becoming a contested domain. But more importantly, I think that there's just a lot of very positive reinforcement coming from our government about space commerce. And so we're starting to see already a lot of new money flooding into the system. We're starting to see more customers come to us. And we think the government customers start to align with us much more strongly over the next 4 years.
Perfect. Are you seeing also more relaxed regulation coming from the country for the space economy?
Generally not. But one of the things I think we expect under Trump is not a turn to a heavy amount of regulation. There might be some relaxation. Really, it's not that high at the moment. So, most of us, I think, would not complain about the amount of regulation in the space industry.
Okay, I got it. Which country are you seeing is the more head-to-head in terms of the advancement of the space race?
Well, so interestingly, on a commercial basis, we don't compete with China, but I think everybody would say militarily the United States and the West are, competitors with China. There seems to be kind of like the old Soviet days, where there's one economic sphere under China and one under the West. And so apart from that, I'd say in the commercial side, we see Europe as probably our biggest economic competitor.
Right, I got it. And then micro levelly, competing with Phantom Space in particular, are there any particular competitors that is always competing on contract fronts?
Yeah, so like on launch, we have on the NASA contract, there are some of the large, typical players, and then there's some others like Rocket Lab that we typically compete with, and some degree you've got some of the other smaller launch providers. In some of them we work with on the side, so it's a small industry, and it tends not to be a terribly cutthroat competition. Most of the competition comes in how you design your products and place them, what kind of capabilities they have, and it just creates a natural attraction for some customers.
It almost feels like, it could be SpaceX sets the tone for that sort of Mars launch bit for the future.
Yeah.
To the moon, to the Mars, and now we're talking about the Mars economy bit of the infrastructure. And not many people are really doing it except you, with the experience and the like of Rocket Lab and stuff. So are we seeing sort of this really new economy coming in? And if I could put a analogy, launching is like NVIDIA chip design for AGI, if you like. And now launching is a foundation for all the space economy for the future. Are you seeing it much more premature or getting very mature from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we're, where the auto industry was 100 years ago, and there's a lot of competitors. There's going to be, some streamlining of, mainline players. And my view is the mainline players in the future are going to be the ones that have an integrated launch satellite and orbital constellation capability. Rocket Lab will tell you the same thing. SpaceX obviously thinks that way. So we'll have to see how how that goes. But it's like in the United States, there were for many years just three or four major manufacturers. I think we'll see a consolidation over the next 10 years like that. And we've already seen, something like 180 rocket companies 7 or 8 years ago, and now we're down to probably 6 or 7. And we think of ourselves as unique because we do this vertical product market integration, and very few others do.
Okay, excellent. And then last few questions, I suppose, on data center side, capex, energy, and now even Mac company in the Europe doing some new material, try to cool down the cooling, material data center. And then now we've got 500 billion spending just from the government across different hardware, software, you name it. And then we're talking about building data center on the space. Are you seeing it really like, a huge demand realistically happening, or are we just preparing for the future earlier today?
Both. So if you talk to any major corporation in the United States today, they will tell you that they're very concerned about their data centers going down, whether it's from a fire in a city like Los Angeles. Can you imagine an earthquake, a flood? It could be a nuclear attack. It could be a lot of things, a terrorist attack. And all of these companies need a place to reboot from. And, sort of a zero reset. Space is a place where, weapons aren't going to find you, weather's not going to find you, natural disasters aren't going to find you. And so this is very appealing to them, this idea of space-based data centers as their core reboot strategy and insurance policy. We're also seeing a huge amount of interest from things like crypto. So yeah, it's and then a lot of other kinds of things we'll never think of. We've got satellite companies who are talking to us already about, hey, they want to put their AI on our data servers to work with their data and reduce their data loads as they get the data back and get better data from it.
Right. Can you give us an idea? So how much cheaper and how much more efficient do you expect the efficiency and the energy usage would it be to build a more mature data center down the road at the space?
Yeah, so the trade-off really is, the CapEx is probably roughly the same to place a data center in space it is on the ground, but that same CapEx will buy you less of a data center, so you won't have as much storage, as much throughput, but it's got different characteristics, right? And it can't be affected by all these other things we've been talking about, natural disasters and so forth. The other sort of advantage of it is the operational costs are near zero. There's the cooling's passive in space because it's a very cold, radiative environment, so you don't have to pay for cooling like you do on the ground. And then power is free. So we use solar energy in space. And that's one of the things we focused on at Phantom is building cheap solar panels for our satellites. And so it's that trade-off, but it's such a unique product. And we're working with a company to have quantum proof encryption on the system. We think it'll be a very, very unique product.
How about on the flip side, the maintenance cost or the data transfer cost, from space back to the Earth? I mean, is that something that is hard to tackle?
Data transfer will be much, much cheaper. Starlink, for example, is about 2 times less than terrestrial fiber. And I think their cost of deploying that has gotten way down below what terrestrial fiber is coming in at. So even their CapEx is lower for Starlink. In terms of, our costs, we think our operating costs could be way, way lower, 10 times lower than what terrestrial operating costs can be.
Oh, okay. In many years, are you seeing Phantom Space to be break even? And until then, are we already seeing the few lines of business up and running that you expect?
Yeah, we get break even on our launch only by itself. And we get break even about 6 launches a year. So call it 10 if you want to be conservative. We make about 25% gross margins on our satellites. So as we get more of those, that just helps. So this whole data center stuff happens on top of that base case where we're making profit. That's one of the things I like about the business. I've run a lot of businesses, and I like to be self-sufficient, cash flow positive.
Yeah, and I know you also spend a lot of money in the first day into Phantom Space yourself, which is very good commitment. And lastly, you mentioned you've 11 startup, all different areas and stuff. Can you give us, the entrepreneur or the audience here some free advice of how you believe entrepreneurs should be, to make themselves a success?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, first of all, choose the right people to be around you. And that's really critical, all the way from the board members to the people that assemble your stuff on the floor. So the second thing you have to realize is, like I gave you a discussion about capital, the capital is absolutely precious. and you have to wait until, I like to say, the last hour, the last day of the last month to buy something, and then you wait another month because sometimes people figure out they don't need it. So you just don't do anything till way past the time you have to in terms of spending. And then really the third thing is you have to, take stock of your mistakes and learn from them. And hopefully you don't make too many mistakes, but when you do, you can't lie to yourself. And if you follow all this advice and work hard, you'll be very successful. Don't worry about the money, because it's being passionate about it and being good at it and doing something people want. Then you make money, and that's a reflection of the value you've created.
That's perfect. It's all really, really good advice, Jim. So thank you again, Jim, for all the sharing. I wish Phantom Space all the very success, like you said in the book. We give all the credit to the future and all of the adventure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.